It was a chilly morning in San Francisco, the kind where the fog clings to the buildings like an old ghost, refusing to let go. Down on a street corner near the bustling heart of Silicon Valley, a young girl, no more than 16, stood with a cardboard sign in her hands. The words scribbled on it were simple but heartbreaking. Homeless, no family, need help. She was dressed in worn clothes, a thin jacket that barely offered any protection from the biting wind. Her hair was tangled, her face drawn with exhaustion and uncertainty. She looked like so many others who had found themselves lost on the streets of the city, but there was something different about her, something that drew the attention of a man passing by. Mark Zuckerberg, the founder of Facebook, was walking briskly towards a nearby tech conference, surrounded by his team and a few bodyguards. He was busy, as always, his mind consumed with the next big idea, the next shift in the ever-evolving tech world. But as he passed the girl, something stopped him. Something in her eyes. They weren't just eyes of a lost, struggling soul. They were eyes filled with hope. Eyes that asked not for pity, but for a lifeline. Without thinking, he stopped in his tracks. The girl, for her part, didn't seem to recognize the man who had reshaped the digital landscape. She wasn't a fan or a follower of his. To her, he was just another stranger, another person who could walk by without a second glance. But when he spoke, his words hit her like a punch in the gut. "Do you need help?" The simplicity of the question hung in the air, as if the entire world had paused to witness this moment. In that instant, the city around them seemed to fade away. It wasn't just the question that stunned her, it was the tone. Mark Zuckerberg wasn't offering just money or charity. There was something in his voice that made her wonder if this could be more. Could it be that he, of all people, might have the power to change her life? And then, as quickly as the question had left his lips, he turned and walked away. The girl stood frozen, the sign still in her hand, as the enormity of the moment sank in. Why had he asked? What had he meant? The mystery of that encounter would unravel in ways neither of them could have ever predicted. The encounter with Mark Zuckerberg left Lila feeling more confused than anything else. She couldn't shake the memory of his voice, calm and measured, asking if she needed help. But the question hung in the air like a riddle with no answer. After all, what kind of help could someone like him give to someone like her? Lila had grown, used to living on the streets. It was a grim reality she'd learned to navigate over the past year. She was a product of the system, a foster child bounced between homes that didn't care enough to keep her. By the time she had turned 15, she'd run away, escaping the instability and neglect that had defined her childhood. The streets were cold, unforgiving, but they didn't lie. There were rules here. If you were clever and kept your head down, you could survive. But that day had felt different. As she wandered back to her usual corner near the tech district, her mind replaying that moment with Zuckerberg, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. She told herself it was just a fluke, that he was busy, rich, untouchable. He wouldn't really care, would he? Still, the thought gnawed at her until it was the only thing she could think about. As if in response to the feeling swirling in her chest, her phone buzzed. It was a message from her older brother, Max, the only family she had left. "Where are you?" Max wasn't much older than Lila, just a couple of years. But he'd taken on the role of her protector since they were both placed in foster care. They'd always looked out for each other, surviving the chaos of their upbringing by sticking together. But lately, Max had been drifting, getting deeper into trouble with people who didn't care about anything but themselves. He had fallen into the wrong crowd, and she knew it. Same place, the usual corner. She hesitated before hitting send, wondering if she was making a mistake by still trusting him. But family was all she had, no matter how messy or imperfect it was. Less than an hour later, Max appeared out of the fog, his face shadowed and eyes hard. His clothes were new, but there was a dullness to his gaze that Lila hadn't seen before. He wasn't the brother who used to laugh and joke with her. This was a stranger she didn't fully recognize. "Hey!" He greeted her curtly, not meeting her eyes. "You got any food?" Lila nodded, reaching into her backpack for the half-eaten sandwich she'd been saving. As she handed it to him, she noticed the familiar scowl on his face. Something was off. Max was never like this. "Why do you look so different?" she asked softly. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he shoved the sandwich into his mouth, his movements aggressive, like he was trying to swallow something painful. Lila felt her stomach twist. "Don't worry about me," he muttered, finally meeting her eyes. "You need to be careful. People are looking for you." The weight of his words hit her harder than she expected. "Who?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Max's eyes darted around, scanning the street as if someone might be lurking in the shadows, watching. "Them. It's not safe here anymore," he said, his voice shaking with an edge of fear. Before Lila could respond, her phone buzzed again. This time, the message was from an unknown number. It was a simple, unsettling question. "Do you need help?" Her heart skipped a beat. The words were eerily familiar. She stared at the screen for a long moment, her fingers trembling as they hovered over the keyboard. Was it him? Was Zuckerberg reaching out again? But why? What did he want? Max glanced over, her shoulder, his eyes narrowing. "Who's that? Who's messaging you?" Lila didn't answer, her mind racing. There were too many questions, too many unknowns, but one thing was clear. Something was happening, and it was bigger than her. She didn't know what to do next. The streets were no longer a safe haven, and this strange message from an unexpected source left her feeling more exposed than ever. As the fog swirled around them, Lila's sense of urgency heightened. Something was coming, and she wasn't sure if she was ready for it, but she couldn't ignore the question anymore. Would she ask for help? Would she trust a man like Zuckerberg? Or would she turn her back on the only chance that might lead her out of this life? Lila sat back against the cold concrete of the alley, her phone in her trembling hands. The message from the unknown number blinked at her, taunting her with its simplicity. "Do you need help?" For a second, she thought about ignoring it. Maybe it was just some sick joke. Maybe another scam to lure her in, take advantage of her desperation. She had seen it all. Promises of easy money, fake charity drives, predators masked as angels. But then she remembered Mark Zuckerberg's face, the way he'd stopped and looked at her. No, really looked at her, as if he saw more than just a homeless girl with a cardboard sign. It had made her feel something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. She couldn't just toss that aside. Still, the fear gnawed at her. Trusting people had never worked out for her, least of all a billionaire tech mogul. Was this just another game to him? To them? She had spent years dodging the system, not trusting anyone but Max, and now he was slipping away too, lost in his own spiral of trouble. Max. His words echoed in her mind. "People are looking for you. It's not safe here anymore." She looked over at him, pacing nervously a few feet away, hands buried deep in his pockets, his jaw clenched. He wasn't looking at her now, but she could feel his tension. The last few months had been hard on him, and harder still when he got involved with some shady characters. Lila tried not to worry. She had enough of her own problems, but it was hard to ignore the growing sense of dread that crept up her spine. The streets weren't as kind as they used to be. The usual faces around the city were gone or scattered, and there were rumors, whispers about a new group that had taken control of the area. Their presence was different, more dangerous. Her phone buzzed again. "You're not alone." Lila froze, her stomach twisting in a knot. It was too precise, too personal. Whoever was behind these messages knew something about her, something She hadn't told anyone. Her breath caught in her throat. She'd been avoiding the feeling for so long, but now it was undeniable. There was someone out there watching her. Who's texting you? Max's voice broke through her thoughts. His face was unreadable, but his tone was sharp, filled with suspicion. He wasn't looking at her now, but at the phone she was still, holding. Just some random number, Lila muttered, trying to keep her voice steady. Nothing. But Max's eyes narrowed, and for the first time she saw something different in him, something close to panic. You're not safe, Lila, I'm telling you. You need to get out of here now. He grabbed her arm roughly, pulling her toward the alley exit. Lila yanked her arm back. Max, stop! I'm not going anywhere until I know what's going on. I can't just keep running. His expression hardened, his lips pressing into a thin line. You don't get it. There's more going on here than you think. You don't know what they can do. Lila's eyes flashed with frustration. She had known Max her whole life, but she hadn't seen him like this. Desperation and fear were choking his words. She wasn't sure whether he was trying to protect her or himself. The phone buzzed again, this time with a new message. I can help. But you have to trust me. She stared at the screen, her hand shaking. Her heart raced, her mind swirling with possibilities. Could she trust him? Could she trust Mark Zuckerberg? Suddenly, everything seemed to collapse inward. The world outside the foggy alley blurred, and Lila was left standing in a space between hope and fear. Max was right about one thing. She couldn't stay here. But going forward, would she be running into safety or straight into danger? She glanced at her brother once more, but before she could say anything, a car screeched down the street, its headlights cutting through the fog. A dark figure stepped out, moving with purpose. Lila's heart skipped. Max's grip tightened around her wrist. Get in the car, the figure called out. Lila froze, her pulse pounding in her ears. Whoever this was, whoever they had been talking to, wasn't friendly. The decisions now, the ones she was about to make, might change everything. But there was no turning back now. Lila's breath hitched as the figure in the car stepped forward, his movements deliberate, his face barely visible beneath the hood. Max jerked her back instinctively, his grip tightening painfully around her wrist. I told you this wasn't safe, he muttered, his voice rough with panic. The figure's voice came again, calm and unsettling. I'm not here to hurt you. Get in the car, Lila. Her heart pounded, each beat louder than the last. Max was trembling beside her now, his eyes wide with fear. This wasn't just some random encounter. Whatever was happening, whatever had been set into motion, was much bigger than she had ever imagined. Lila's gaze flickered back to her phone, the message still open on the screen. I can help, but you have to trust me. A sickening realization settled in her stomach. The car, the stranger, the messages, it was all connected. Max was pulling her back now, trying to drag her away from the car. Lila, no! These people, they're dangerous. They'll do anything to get to you. But Lila wasn't listening. Something inside her clicked, a sudden surge of clarity amidst the confusion. She had been running her whole life, hiding from the world, hiding from everything that could hurt her. But for once, she was standing at a crossroads. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about taking control of her life, even if it meant stepping into the unknown. Max, she said, her voice quiet but resolute. I have to go. I have to see what this is about. Max's eyes widened in shock, his mouth opening as if to protest. But Lila didn't wait for his response. She turned to face the stranger, who stood waiting, his expression unreadable. As she stepped forward, Max yanked her back once more, his desperation apparent. You don't know who these people are, he shouted. You're making a mistake. Lila, I won't let you do this! Lila's chest tightened with a mixture of guilt and determination. She had always trusted Max. He was her protector, the one person who had always been there. But now, It was as if he was the one trying to hold her back, trying to keep her in the same place where they had both been stuck for years, the same place that had almost destroyed her. "I can't stay here anymore, Max," she said, her voice steady but filled with the weight of her decision. "I'm not the little girl who needs saving. I'm the one who needs to save myself." For a moment, the air between them hung heavy with unspoken words. Max looked at her with a mixture of anger and fear, his face twisting as if trying to reconcile the sister he had always known with the stranger standing before him. "I'm not asking you to understand," Lila whispered. "I'm just asking you to let me go." With one final look, she turned away from him and walked toward the car. Each step felt like a mile. The fog was thick, the chill in the air biting at her skin, but she didn't hesitate. She knew this was the only way forward. This wasn't just about trusting someone. This was about trusting herself. The figure in the car opened the door for her, his eyes hidden in shadow. "Thank you," he said simply. Lila swallowed the lump in her throat. She didn't know what awaited her inside, but she was done waiting for things to happen to her. This was her choice now. As she slid into the back seat, the door shutting softly behind her, the car pulled away. She glanced out the window one last time, catching a final glimpse of Max standing alone in the fog. And though her heart ached for him, she knew there was no turning back. This was the beginning of something new, and she was ready for whatever came next. The car sped through the fog, the streets blurring outside the window as Lila's heart raced in her chest. Her mind whirled with 1,000 questions. Who was this person? What did they want from her? What had she just gotten herself into? The figure in the front seat remained silent, focused on the road ahead. He was an enigma, his face still hidden beneath the shadow of his hood. Every moment that passed felt like an eternity, the air thick with tension. Eventually, the car slowed, turning off into a quiet, unfamiliar neighborhood. The buildings were run down, their windows boarded up, the streetlights flickering erratically. It felt like a world apart from the tech-driven hustle of Silicon Valley, a place where danger lingered in the corners of every dark alley. The car stopped in front of a dilapidated warehouse, its rusted metal doors looming like the gates to some forgotten place. Lila felt a shiver run through her, but she forced herself to remain steady. This was it. There was no turning back now. The figure in the front seat finally spoke, his voice low and steady. "You wanted to know why we reached out. This is why." And the door opened, and Lila stepped out, her feet hitting the cracked concrete. She glanced around nervously as the figure motioned for her to follow. As they approached the warehouse, Lila's mind raced. Was this some sort of test? Or worse, a trap? Every instinct in her screamed to turn and run, to find safety in the unknown city around her. But then she remembered the message, the same one that had brought her here. "I can help. But you have to trust me." She had trusted before, trusted Max, trusted people who had ultimately let her down. But this time it was different. This was her choice. Inside the warehouse, the air was thick with tension. The walls were lined with old crates, the floor littered with broken machinery. In the far corner, a large figure was waiting. As the man stepped closer, the dim light illuminated his face, and Lila's breath caught in her throat. It was Mark Zuckerberg. Lila blinked, trying to process the sight in front of her. The tech mogul, the billionaire who had redefined the digital age, standing in the midst of a crumbling warehouse like some kind of shadow. He didn't look like the polished, confident CEO she had seen in the media. He looked different, disheveled, focused, as if he had been waiting for this moment for a long time. "You're probably wondering why I brought you here," Mark said, his voice calm, almost too calm. "The truth is, you were never just a random girl on the street. You were always meant to be part of something bigger." Lila's head spun. "What are you talking about?" He took a step closer, his gaze never leaving hers. You've been running from the system your entire life, Lila. But what if I told you that the system was never what you thought it was? What if I told you there was a way out, a way to rewrite the rules entirely? Lila's heart raced. Was he offering her a way out of the streets? A way to escape the life she had been trapped in? Or was this just another manipulation, another layer of the web that had ensnared so many before her? "You're asking me to trust you," she said, her voice steady despite the pounding in her chest. "But why? Why me?" Mark smiled, a flash of something almost empathetic in his eyes. "Because you're the key to everything. You've always had the power. You just never knew how to use it." Suddenly, a door slammed open behind her. Lila spun around to find Max standing there, his face pale, his eyes wild with fear. "Lila, don't listen to him!" Max shouted, his voice breaking. "This is all a lie. They've been using you all along." Lila's heart clenched at the sight of him, torn between the brother who had protected her all her life and the man who now seemed to hold the key to her freedom. Mark's expression hardened and he stepped forward. "Max, you don't understand. This is bigger than all of us. The only way for any of us to get out is to break the system, and Lila is the one who can do it." The tension in the room thickened, the air heavy with choices that couldn't be undone. Lila's eyes flicked back and forth between Mark and Max, between the promise of something greater and the love and loyalty she felt for the only family she had left. "You don't have to do this," Max pleaded, his voice cracking. "Please don't fall for this. He's not who you think he is." Lila felt the weight of the moment settle on her shoulders, and for the first time in her life, she realized that the choice wasn't just about survival. It was about redefining who she was. Would she walk into the unknown with Mark and seize the chance to change everything? Or would she stay with Max and fight for the life she had always known? The question hung in the air, unresolved, as Lila's world shifted around her. The choice was hers, and it was the most important one she had ever made. Lila stood frozen, torn between the two men who had shaped her life. Mark Zuckerberg's gaze was unwavering, filled with the weight of something grander than she could grasp. Max, on the other hand, was desperate, his eyes wide with fear and pleading. "You don't have to do this, Lila," Max repeated, his voice cracked with emotion. "You can still get out. We can leave this place together." Lila's heart ached, her mind torn between the brother who had been her rock and the man who claimed to offer a chance at something unimaginable. Mark's offer was tempting. Freedom. From the streets, a chance to reshape everything she had ever known. But Max's words carried a different weight. He had always been the one to fight for her, to protect her when no one else would. Was this really the escape she needed, or was it another trap? Mark stepped forward, his voice calm but insistent. "You've always felt the cracks in the system, Lila. You've known there was more, haven't you? You're not just running from the world. You're running from your potential." Lila felt the pull, the strange allure of something new, something powerful. But then she saw Max's face, his shoulders slumped in defeat, and the decision became clear. She couldn't leave him behind, not after everything they had been through, not when she was still unsure of what this path with Mark would truly cost. "I'm sorry," she said softly to Mark, her voice steady but filled with resolve. "I'm not ready for this. I'm not going to use people the way you want me to. I'm going to find my own way out. And I'm not doing it without my brother." Mark's eyes flickered with something unreadable, but his lips barely curved into a smile. "It's your choice, Lila, but know this. No matter where you go, you'll always find the system waiting for you. It's inescapable. There are no real choices, just illusions of freedom." Max stepped forward, his face softened now, his voice steady as he spoke to Lila. "I don't know what he promised you. I don't know if I can protect you from what's coming next. But I'll always be here for you. The weight of Mark's words lingered in the air, but Lila no longer felt the need to argue or defend herself. She had made her choice. The world around her may have been broken, the system corrupted beyond repair, but there was a difference between surviving and living. She wasn't going to trade one cage for another, no matter how gilded it appeared. Together, she and Max walked out of the warehouse, leaving the shadows behind them. The fog had lifted, and the city stretched out before them, bathed in the first light of dawn. For the first time in a long while, Lila felt something stir within her, a glimmer of hope, small but real. They didn't have all the answers, but they had each other. And sometimes, that was enough to start over. As they walked into the uncertain world ahead, Lila looked up at the sky, a new sense of determination settling in her chest. The journey hadn't ended, but it had taken a new direction. And in that moment, she realized that true freedom wasn't about escaping the system. It was about creating a life where she could live on her own terms. The only way out, she whispered to herself, is to keep moving forward. And with that, she did.